everyone. Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I'm producer Pat Ford filling in for David today as he is traveling in California. We're going to have guest hosts for the remainder of the week. So some pretty big news on the Donald Trump indictment front happened over the weekend. Donald Trump was interviewed by Bret Baier on Fox News, and he couldn't get through the 20-minute or so exchange without incriminating himself multiple times, admitting to doing the very things that he's been accused of in this federal indictment. Donald Trump has been doing media interviews. He's been doing these rallies wherein he talks about the criminal charges and basically admits to the fact that he had these classified documents in his possession and obstructed justice thereafter. This is, of course, a terrible idea for any criminal defendant. Any counsel, defense lawyers would advise you not to speak about the case, but because Donald Trump is running for president and he needs to at all times appear like he's a fighter, he believes he's smarter than everyone else, he is deciding to just do it anyway, to talk about the case. And what he's been doing really is giving himself more and more rope to hang himself with, and that's because, generally speaking, the prosecution can use such statements that you make in the media to establish your guilt or to try to undermine your defense arguments. And legally, it can get more complicated, of course, because you get into a conversation about what is and what isn't admissible in court, what does and what doesn't qualify as hearsay. But there's a strong case that these media interviews, like the one we're about to look at, by Trump will end up being used as exhibits in his upcoming trial. So the bottom line is, this is why you stay silent. I think it was Ron Filipkowski on Twitter who said that if the 500 best lawyers in the entire world told Donald Trump to stay silent on this matter, he would disregard them, thinking that he was smarter than all of them, and then MAGA would use that as justification to vote for him because they would think that that's some sort of qualification for being president, even though that would actually make him the worst possible choice to be president. Zeroing in on the most damaging things that Donald Trump said during this interview, Trump admits to taking the documents down to Mar-a-Lago with him, and that he had these boxes of documents in his possession, that they were interspersed with his personal possessions, and this is all going to the charge of willful retention of national defense information. He's admitting to the whole thing here. Let's take a look at the clip.
Why did you have this very sensitive national security defense documents, like the war plans for a strike on Iran?
So like every other president, I take things out. And in my case, I took it out pretty much in a hurry, but people packed it up and we left. And I had clothing in there. I had all sorts of personal items in there, much stuff. I have every right to have those boxes. This is purely a Presidential Records Act. This is not a criminal thing. In fact, the New York Times of all had a story just the other day that the only way NARA could ever get this stuff, this back, would be please, could we have it back?
And they
please,
asked for that.
Because they have no, we
They
were
did
talking.
ask for it.
No, and
they said,
I gave
can you
them
give
some,
the documents back?
and we were talking.
And then they said they went to DOJ to subpoena you to get them
Which
back.
they've never done before.
Right. And
in
but
all
why not
fairness,
just hand them over then?
Because I had boxes. I want to go through the boxes and get all my personal things out. I don't want to hand that over to NARA yet. And I was very busy, as you've sort of seen.
Yeah, but
I've been
according to
very,
the
very
indictment,
busy.
you then tell this aide to move to other locations after telling your lawyers to say you'd fully complied with the subpoena when you hadn't.
But before I send boxes over, I have to take all of my things out. These boxes were interspersed with all sorts of things, golf shirts, clothing, pants, shoes. There were many things. I would say much more, not that I know of, but not that I know of.
So it's hard not to laugh when Trump is talking about his golf shirts and his shoes that he had to take out before sending the boxes back from NARA. But I think that the key takeaway from the entire statement here is that he does admit to taking the documents. He admits that he was in contact with NARA about sending them back. And his defense was essentially that he was too busy. He didn't have time to get around to it, even though he was subpoenaed in this case. And once you receive a subpoena, you're supposed to realize, oh, this is actually serious. If the fact that you were in contact with authorities before the subpoena wasn't enough of a message to take this thing seriously, the subpoena should have done it for you. But he decided to continue to ignore it and to have his lawyers lie to the authorities about what exactly he had in his possession. Remember that key in this case is the charge of willful retention of national defense information. That's what 31 of the 37 counts hinge on. And he's saying, yeah, I did it. It wouldn't matter if his golf shirts were also in there, or if they weren't in there, or if he had time to get around to it, or if he didn't have time to get around to it. He seems to be guilty of these crimes. Now let's move on to the audio tape. This is something that prosecutors have in their possession, tape of Donald Trump while he's showing a guest of his who presumably doesn't have a security clearance, classified material, and he admits that he could have declassified it while he was president, but he didn't, and now he doesn't have the authority to do so anymore, so therefore it is still classified. Trump's argument surrounding his right to have these documents depend on him saying that he could have declassified whatever he wanted to as president, telepathically even, right? Well, this isn't true because we've heard from experts about this. There's this process that you have to go through to declassify information, particularly when it comes to things like nuclear secrets and other top-level confidential information that the government has. But even if it was true, this tape that prosecutors have completely undermines the argument, right? Because we know for sure that Donald Trump didn't even attempt to declassify the documents by declaration, telepathically or otherwise, and now he can't because he's no longer president. He admits to this. So this is among the strongest pieces of evidence that the prosecution has. It's really what could end up doing him in, and Trump is doing himself no favors by talking about this very specific piece of information, of evidence that the prosecution has, and he provides just the absolute worst defense that anyone could possibly come up with, falling right into the trap of talking about it because Bret Baier happened to bring it up.
According to the indictment, you were here at Bedminster on July 21st, 2021, after you're no longer president, and you were recorded saying that you had a document detailing a plan of attack on another country that was prepared by the U.S. military for you when you were president, the Iran attack plan. You remember that?
Ready?
You were recorded.
It wasn't a document.
Okay.
I had lots of paper. I had copies of newspaper articles. I had copies of magazines.
I know. This is specifically a quote. You're quoted on the recording saying the document was secret, adding that you could have declassified it while you were president, but, quote, now I can't. You know this is still secret, highly confidential. And the indictment cites the recording and the testimony from people in the room saying you showed it to people there that day. So you say on this on tape
it says just the opposite,
that you can't declassify it. So why have it?
When I said that I couldn't declassify it now, that's because I wasn't president. I never made any bones about that. When I'm not president, I can't declassify.
And that's what you said. You didn't declassify it.
I said no. I said I couldn't.
Could have
but that wasn't a
declassified
document, Brett. There was no document. That was a massive amount of papers and everything else talking about Iran and other things. And it may have been held up or may not, but that was not a document. I didn't have a document per se. There was nothing to declassify. These were newspaper stories, magazine stories, and articles.
I'm just saying what the indictment says.
So number one, Donald Trump does not deny that the recording exists or that the conversation happened, which is interesting because I've been hearing in many right-wing circles on right-wing programs that the audio tape was clearly artificial intelligence. They can't come up with any sort of reasonable excuse for why Trump would be saying this, so they're saying, okay, it must have been a deep fake. You can do a lot with AI these days. But Donald Trump himself is not using that excuse, right? He's not even disputing the fact that the conversation took place. He's disputing what the conversation was about, but he's not disputing that it happened or that was him in that conversation. So we can put to bed now this weak excuse that the right has come up with that must have been AI and not actually Trump on the recording. Furthermore, Trump says that these weren't documents that he was showing his guests, but instead they were newspaper clippings and articles. And I don't know how Bret Baier didn't pick up on this in real time, but this is a totally nonsensical statement, right? How could newspaper clippings and articles be considered government classified documents? By their very definition, newspaper clippings and articles are meant for public consumption, whereas government secrets are kept as these private documents. And Donald Trump says on the tape, it's classified. I'm not supposed to be showing you this. So Donald Trump really just digging himself his own grave. And he's had plenty of time to come up with a proper defense when it comes to the audio tape specifically. That's the most damaging piece of evidence seemingly against him. And this is all he can do, just kind of stumble around. And again, all of this stuff can be used against him in court, presumably. So obviously this is a unique case. I don't think he's going to take a plea deal or anything like this because he has to show that he's a true fighter. But with all this stuff and with all the damaging things that he's said to the media, all the times that he's implicated himself, that would be the best course of action for him. He's not going to go through with that, most likely. He's going to go to trial, and I'm sure he's banking on the fact that he has this right-wing judge that he appointed presiding over the case, and the possibility that because the trial's being held in South Florida, there'll be enough Trumpists on the jury to get him the not guilty verdict or maybe give him a hung jury. I think that's what he's trying to do here, and I understand how he feels as if he has to talk about the case because of the politics of it, because he's running for president again and he has to look like a fighter, but it's just not good strategically from a criminal prosecution standpoint if you're trying to stay out of prison. And one more clip I wanted to show you from this Bret Baier interview. Bret Baier talked about how Trump has to bring new voters into his camp in order to defeat Biden in 2024. And so Bret Baier asked the question, if you're speaking one-on-one to an independent voter, how are you going to convince them to vote for you in 2024 if they didn't vote for you in 2020? And without missing a step, Donald Trump goes right into conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. The question wasn't even about the 2020 election specifically and whether Trump won or lost, but Trump has to jump right in and say that he actually won the election, even though this was not being disputed at the time by Bret Baier. So let's take a look at this.
And so to the female independent voter in the suburbs who struggled with family financing because of inflation, she's now against Biden, disapproves of Biden, but wasn't with you in 2020, and so far is a hard no for you in 2024. But what do you say to that?
Looking at the right polls.
What do you say to that female independent suburban voter who feels that way, to win her back?
First of all, I won in 2020 by a lot, okay? Let's get that straight. I won in 2020.
You know that this,
and if you look at all of the tapes, if you look at everything that you want to look at, you take a look at Truth to Vote, where they have people stuffing the ballot boxes on tapes, or
Mr. President,
let's go to recent. Well, wait a minute. Let's go to recent. FBI Twitter. Let's go to recent. The 51 agents, all corrupt stuff, Brett.
Understand about the Hunter Biden,
no, but
all
that's cheating
fair
on the
things.
election.
But
that's cheating on the election.
you lost the 2020 election.
Brett, you take a look at all of the stuffed ballots. You take a look at all of the things, including things like the 51 intelligence agents.
There were recounts in all of the swing states. There was not significant widespread
We're trying
fraud.
to get recounts, real recounts,
There were
not just numbers of votes
widespread
cast.
corruption. There was not a sense of that. There were lawsuits, more than 50 of them, by your lawyers, some in front of
Brett, are you
judges that you appointed.
Look at Wisconsin.
That came out with no evidence.
Wisconsin has practically admitted it was rigged. Other states are doing the same right now, and it's continuing on.
There have been
It was
reviews
a
of
rigged
every
election.
potential case of voter fraud in 6 battleground states, and they found fewer than 475 cases.
You know why?
that
Because
were
they
not
didn't look
affected.
at the right things.
Okay,
Brett.
are you going
they
to
were
be
counting? They were counting ballots, not the authenticity of the ballot. The ballots were fake ballots. You had this was a very rigged
Are you
election.
going to go? This is how you're going to tell that independent suburban woman voter
No,
to vote for
we're
you?
off to winning an election, and I think we're winning very well. I got a poll just recently. I have it here. I'd show
I
you.
know.
Okay, so it's not even worth going through Donald Trump's claims there one by one. We've done that ad nauseum over the years, and Bret Baier does a decent job at fact-checking him in real time. But I thought that Baier especially did well at the end there by emphasizing the fact that his question was about how do you win over an undecided female independent voter who didn't vote for you in 2020. And your response has been to complain about voter fraud, even though the public is tired of hearing about this issue. It's not a winning issue for you. It's not a voting issue for people, independents especially. It's not policy. You're not being convincing when you talk about this. It's uninspiring. And then Trump tries to course correct, but instead of doing it in the standard way of talking about, the normal policy issues, the economy, the border, guns, even culture war stuff, if you want to get into it, instead he diverts into talking about how he's winning in all the polls. So people should vote for him because he's winning? Like, how does this add up? How does this follow logically? So Trump's appeal to the independent voter who didn't vote for him in 2020 is, number one, the election was rigged in 2020 and it was unfairly stolen for me. Therefore, I deserve another term. And number two, I'm winning in the polls already, so you should vote for me because I'm winning. So I got to say, this guy doesn't look like his normal self. He seems a little bit rattled. I'm sure he's worried about the possibility of serving time in prison. I'm sure he's worried about the possibility of not winning an election again because it devastated him so much the last time that happened. Maybe I'm looking too much into the body language. Maybe I'm looking too much into the facial expressions. But to me, this seems like a very concerned man who doesn't have the poise and the confidence that he normally does That's Donald Trump for you right now. Not feeling his best, I gotta say, and not getting the best end of this exchange with Bret Baier. All right, we're going to go to a break now. We'll be back with much more of the David Pakman Show on the other side.
Whether you're a carpenter, painter, or just want to be prepared for emergencies, if you need a gas mask or respirator, go to our sponsor, Parcel Safety. As many of you know, I'm into emergency preparedness, not crazy prepping, but I want to have some food stored, some supplies. I've talked about water. And multiple respirators are part of that because it's just a staple of being prepared. Respirator sales have been way up in recent years. Natural disasters, wildfires, polluted air, chemical plant accidents, unrest of different kinds, militarized police, all sorts of different reasons. You never know when a respirator or a gas mask from Parcel Safety might come in handy, and it could be when you least expect it. Parcel Safety respirators are also perfect for professionals, contractors, painters, people doing DIY projects at home. All of Parcel Safety's respirators come with a 1-year manufacturer's warranty. Every respirator or gas mask comes with a filter, competitive prices, large discounts for organizations, and outstanding customer service. To be totally honest, I've said before, I'm using these for changing baby diapers. People think I'm kidding, and then they come visit me, and I really am not. It actually is very useful to other parents out there. I do recommend it. Go to davidpakman.com/safety. Use the code PAKMAN for 25% off your first order. The link is down below.